Everyone to the March 29th, 2021 EMS rounds. These rounds are EMS, clinician, mental health, and mental wellness. My name is Richard Hunt. I'm an emergency physician who serves as senior medical advisor at the National Healthcare Preparedness Programs in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. The purpose of these rounds are peer-to-peer real-time sharing of COVID-19 clinical challenges and successes. If I'm a clinician caring for COVID patients, the clinicians I want to learn from are those with the most experience. This is a voluntary public-private collaboration. Thanks to the multiple professional organizations who have collaborated on these rounds. They are not intended to be redundant or replace any organization's initiatives. They are intended to be sharing of clinical experience rather than recommendations or guidance. These ECHO clinical rounds you are now participating in are focused on clinicians sharing their successes and challenges with other clinicians. Thanks to the National Emerging Special Pathogen Training and Education Center, NETEC, for their support with these rounds. NETEC's webinars complement these Project ECHO COVID-19 clinical rounds. Thanks to Project ECHO, Dr. Bruce Strumminger and his team for the peer-to-peer learning platform we use for these rounds. Upcoming ECHO COVID-19 clinical rounds currently are all US noon Eastern time. Mondays are EMS, Tuesdays are critical care. Tomorrow's, as in Tuesdays, critical care rounds are going to be focused on the inpatient-outpatient interface, outpatient therapy as an inpatient surge mitigator. On Thursday, we'll have emergency department rounds on many of our rounds, no matter what the series, whether it be EMS, critical care, or emergency department. Workforce issues continue to dominate a lot of the chat, a lot of the discussion. And for emergency department rounds, we're going to have a medical student, a fourth-year medical student who just matched in emergency medicine. The second speaker for that series will be the immediate past president of the Emergency Medicine Residents Association for their perspectives. Please note the HHS ECHO outpatient, outpatient therapeutics mini-series that we hold weekly, usually on Wednesdays. And at this juncture, I'll now turn it over to Amanda Dezan from Project ECHO.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Amanda Dezan with Project ECHO. Just going to go over some quick logistics. On your Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A function. Please use that for any questions or comments regarding the presentations today. There's also a chat function on Zoom. Please use that for any questions regarding technical or logistic issues, and we'll also be using the chat for a crowdsourcing question in just a minute. Today's session, like all our past ones, is being recorded and your attendance is consent to be recorded, so thank you. The presentations are linked to the most recent email announcement that went out this morning from Project ECHO, and we'll also be posting that on our website along with a recording once it's ready to go. We do provide CME and continuing professional development credits from the University of New Mexico, where we're located. The link for that is in today's email announcement, and we'll also be putting it in the chat about in the last 15 minutes of today's session. A quick reminder to everybody that these learning sessions are focused on improving patient care and health systems and supporting clinicians. So we appreciate everybody keeping things apolitical and non-commercial. A quick note about data use. While we do collect things from registration, the chat, the Q&A, all those various places, individual data is kept completely confidential. We don't share that information with anybody, including HHS ASPR, and you can read our full data statement here on the screen. As mentioned, NETEC does have webinars that complement these series. It looks like they don't have any planned at the moment, but I'm sure there's more coming soon. And you can go to their website and view all their past recordings of their webinars. Another quick reminder to everybody that the AAMC does have a continually updated COVID-19 clinical guidance repository, and we recommend checking that out. We can put a link in the chat where you can find that. And back to you with the crowdsourcing question.
Thanks. Apropos to today's topic, today's crowdsourcing question: why are mental health challenges of EMS clinicians so stigmatized? Why are mental health challenges of EMS clinicians so stigmatized? And my experience with our participants is that you're not particularly shy, so it would be great to see your thoughts on this one. With that, let me have each of the panelists please take themselves off mute and introduce yourselves, please. And I'll start with Dr. Cunningham.
Good morning. I'm Carol Cunningham. I am the State Medical Director for the Ohio Department of Public Safety Division EMS.
Thanks, Carol. Dr. Isikoff.
Morning, all. I'm Alex Isikoff. I'm an EMS and emergency medicine physician at Emory University and the EMS lead for NETEC.
Great. Dan Gerard.
Hi, I'm Dan Gerard. I am the EMS coordinator for the City of Alameda Fire Department, and I'm also the president-elect for the International Association of EMS Chiefs.
Thanks, Dan, for joining us. Rob?
Hi, I'm Rob McClintock. I'm the Deputy Director of Fire and EMS, the International Association of Firefighters.
Well, I heard the bark. It must be in some firehouse or something. David.
You broke up, Rick. Who did you call on?
David Gerstner. I'm sorry. I like, one of those computer things.
Okay, I'm David Gerstner. I'm with Dayton Fire Department in Ohio, and I'm the regional MMRS coordinator for West Central Ohio.
Thanks. And Bill Fales is down there. Bill, if I see you come off mute, there you go. Go.
Yeah, hello everyone. Bill Fales with Western Michigan University School of Medicine and State Medical Director for EMS and Trauma in Michigan. Thanks.
Great to have you. And also, I want to bring back for just a second. Amanda had mentioned the NETEC's webinar series. And one of the things that actually they did last week is a webinar on Ebola in the context of COVID. And as many of you may be aware, like Ebola hasn't disappeared and reemerged. Apparently it's calming down a little bit, but Dr. Isikoff spent a lot of his career figuring out the Ebola and EMS, and then then he pivoted all over to the pandemic and realized there's always something around the corner. So I just wanted to bring your attention that indeed NETEC did have something on that just went up last week. With that, it's an honor to really introduce this session and our speakers today. I'm just going to introduce our first speaker, and then after her, I'll introduce our second speaker. Rhonda Kelly is the Executive Director for the All Clear Foundation and Director for GMR Life. That includes health, wellness, and resilience with global medical response. So over to you, Rhonda. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here today. Really excited about this group. I first started in emergency response work back in 1996 as an expanded protocol EMT working for the Antarctic program on icebreakers down south. Really enjoyed that. When it was time to get my adult job, I came back to Colorado where the program's based and started volunteering as an EMT and working as a career EMT. While I explored other career paths, thinking I was going to be a nurse or a PA. While shadowing them in ERs, I continued to see firefighter paramedics come in, and that just looked like exactly the same type of work that I had been doing. Very unpredictable schedules, very demanding, a very diverse set of skills required, and more importantly than anything is that it's team-based. I really like that approach, and we're really dependent upon that working on the ships. We were all we had. And I think to the crowdsourcing question, that's another reason why stigmatization of mental health has occurred, and inadvertently, I'll touch on that later. But anyway, I became a firefighter paramedic with Aurora, Colorado for 17 years, picked up my RN on the side and was working part-time in an ER and a psych ER. At that time, I'd become very interested in the mental health challenges, not only of EMS and fire, but what I was watching happening to my comrades in law enforcement and in dispatch in particular, who lack the physical outlets for the chronic stress exposure that the rest of us were able to events in the course of our work. During that time, I had the opportunity to apply as health and safety officer for our department. Spent the next 5 years really working on overall health initiatives, in particular the mental health initiatives. And at the time, my primary issue was that I thought we needed a better mental health program. And to be honest, we needed a mental health program. We didn't have one at all. And the chiefs understood at the time, but they didn't prioritize it financially, which I understood. We had cancer as a huge issue. We had sleep deprivation as a huge issue. There were a multitude of competing, very valid priorities. That all changed with the theater shooting when I got a call at 12:30 in the morning saying, hey, something awful just happened. Can you roll out that program you keep talking about? And of course I couldn't. We hadn't funded it. We hadn't built it. That was the beginning of our mental health program. At the time, the University of Colorado's medical school had reached out to me, the National Mental Health Innovation Center, saying they wanted to work with firefighters. What did we need? At the time, I told them, we need to stop working in isolation, not only among our agencies, but among our branches. EMS, dispatch, law enforcement, fire. We're all essentially siblings in the emergency response world. And I've come to realize over the past couple of years that the emergency medical staff on the other side of the ER doors are also siblings. We're all exposed to some pretty similar experiences. One is that arguably the most intensive exposure over the course of our entire career is to the intense trauma and suffering of other people in the complete absence of any training how to recognize that, how to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other. If we had any training at all, we were trained in mental illness and usually the extreme versions of it, talking to that point around stigmatization. We weren't introduced to the idea of stress injury. We weren't reinforced in recognizing that our greatest strengths for the job are actually our sense of empathy and compassion and our shared sense of humanity. But those are pathways for injury, especially if you're denying those. And we've seen that amplified, especially over the past year with the moral injuries that accompanied the COVID response across the nation. The other big point that I see of commonality between all of our populations is that our cultures are pretty dog eat dog. If anybody has in the past admitted mental or emotional impact, they were told pretty clearly that it must be because you're weak and you should get out. Maybe this isn't the line of work for you, which is a tremendous barrier for anybody reaching out. We are trained that we are supposed to be the responders. We're not supposed to be the ones who need help. But at the same time, our operations haven't prepared us to take care of ourselves. So we're left with no one to care for us. So out of that conversation with the university grew an initiative called Responder Strong. It's a mental health initiative that is a collaboration between emergency responders and our advocates. We knew we couldn't do it alone. We worked with educators, researchers, clinicians, healthcare groups, foundations to create collaborative solutions. What we did is looked at the mental health arena for emergency responders, EMS, fire, law enforcement, dispatch, and frontline healthcare workers, identified systemically where are the flaws, where are our strengths, how can we better leverage the things that we have that are out there. And we started creating solutions in true responder fashion. We recognized that many responders don't know how to use the EAP or their healthcare benefits when they have them. And many times if they do, they're fearful that using those resources is a direct line to administration will ultimately hurt their career or make them fodder for the grapevine. So we started working with groups to improve the quality and the ease of access to EAP and healthcare benefits for good mental health providers. We recognized that there was a lack of cultural competency among many good clinicians who really want to help us, but they don't understand the job, they don't understand the exposures, and oftentimes they miss the underlying trauma, thinking that this is quote unquote just anxiety or just alcoholism, when really it's a failed attempt at coping because we haven't equipped them to cope with those skills or to integrate those skills into their coping mechanisms. We've worked with groups to help us improve relationship and communication skills, recognizing this is the cause, the root of a lot of fracturing in our personal lives, our sanctuary, and a place where we're supposed to be able to recover and heal. And also it's the root of a lot of our workplace conflict. The programs go on. One of the big ones we did, and I'm really excited about it, is our mental health curriculum. We rolled it out in 2018, really pressing the issue of stress injury so that responders, emergency workers can understand that what we're dealing with isn't the mental illness that we were trained about in the past, to take away some of that fear that, oh, if I have depression or I have anxiety or I've gotten a DUI, I'm them, not us, because that teamwork, that's where it is The positive social support is great, but inadvertently, a lot of times in the past, our teams have exhibited negative social support. And I think a lot of that comes out of ignorance and fear. Just we don't want to be like the people we run on, not the patients we treat. We want to be one of the team, and we're fearful that if we are perceived as not pulling our weight, that we're going to fall into that weak category. So we stay quiet. We've seen far too many responders choose to take their own lives rather than to reach out and to admit that they're struggling. We're seeing a big resurgence in research lately. I know I love Chris Calkins' work out of Minnesota, talking about the prevalence, and GEMS has done some great work around this too, of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and suicide rates across all the branches, but EMS in particular. We coming back around to COVID, with Responder Strong, I thought it was going to be many, many years before we even got a handle on starting to erode the stigmatization of mental health challenges among emergency responders. And I think that's one of the gifts that COVID gave us. Last year finally got so incredibly, unbelievably relentless and insane that most responders I'm seeing now recognize if I'm not struggling with this, I'm not really paying attention. It's okay to reach out for help because I am in this. It's my passion, it's my soul, and I want to play the long game. People are recognizing that if they want to be a sustainable force, if they want to be effective in their roles, they have to take care of themselves. We're starting to lose some of that superhero and martyr aspect of our cultures in the past. And I find this is a really exciting opportunity. I'm seeing within GMR, and to wrap up that story, GMR invited me to join them as their Director of Health, Wellness, and Resilience in January of 2020. I didn't know what a wild ride was coming, but it was a great opportunity to deal not only with the COVID stress, but to deal with the surge and some of the other challenges, the social unrest, the politicalization of science, all of the dilemmas, the moral challenges that arose out of that year, and to really start offering not only awareness, but solid tools and resources and programs that are available to help responders and to help their agencies deal with this issue. We know there is a tremendous amount of deferred stress injury out there in all emergency response workers, that when we start to later this year shift out of operational and crisis mode, I expect we're going to see just a flood of anxiety, depression, substance misuse, sleep issues, post-traumatic stress, and other challenges that, to be honest, we don't have a large enough competent group of mental health providers to manage. But the responder mindset, the emergency worker mindset being what it is, many of our people don't need licensed medical help or mental health help. They need coaching, but it needs to be qualified coaching. They need somebody who's trusted, who knows what they're talking about, to guide them through the steps. And at the end of those steps to say, hey, you should be feeling better. And if you're not, it's okay. It's an injury. We take care of injuries in real time. You can suck it up. You can pull your way through it if you want. You're probably going to suffer for a couple years. Or you can reach out to the right help. Let us help you get there, and you can get your life back on track. One of the things we're really excited about is, I mentioned some of the tools and resources we've created. We have a free for healthcare workers, emergency responders, and their families tool called the Responder Strong Wellness Tool. You can find it on allclearfoundation.org. It was designed last year with support from the Anschutz Foundation here in Colorado in partnership with Grit Digital Health, who created the Man Therapy program a couple years ago, targeting working age males and suicide awareness and prevention. Wildly successful. We recognized early last year that burnout was going to be a huge problem, and all of its associated issues, compassion fatigue, the list goes on. And that a large part is because the COVID response inadvertently robbed us of a lot of our self-care practices, whether it's going to church, going to the gym, family gatherings, celebrations, vacations, remember those? All of these things that we were restricted in actually started to chip away at our resilience, and we didn't recognize it. So this tool is designed to help the users confidentially identify where they're really doing well in life and where they're not meeting their own basic human needs, and then guiding them to awareness and to the resources to help them do so. So really excited about tools like that. We're working with a donor right now to embed these coaching modules, to create and embed them that I mentioned, and we're hopeful that those will launch later this year as part of the solution. So we see that there has been this great opportunity that the suffering and the challenges that 2020 have created in our population have really increased the openness and the willingness to reach out and be supported. And we're really happy to be able to start reaching out with responder-developed, responder-informed tools to engage.
Rhonda, thanks so much for sharing that. I've got one question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kramer to see if he does have any questions or comments before I then turn it over to Jack. So my question is, all right, since the pandemic hit, and I'm not talking about the early days, but since it's really hit hard, what have you been surprised by anything that you had to like change in your approach to support, or what were the approaches that you thought about before the pandemic, are they working, or you had to like made some big pivots? And if you had to make some big pivots, what were they?
From my perspective, and I'm open to the opinions of others, of course, I think this is just an exacerbation of what we've seen all along. It has been amplified. We have seen moral injury. We have seen stress injury throughout our careers. We've just seen it on a spread out over a greater timeline. And we've talked a lot about the small t versus the large T traumas. We know that most of what we see in emergency responders isn't due to the large headline making critical incidents. It's the daily accumulative trauma that we haven't been managing on the fly. And that's what I see, the relentlessness of 2020 and the abnormality of the exposures, where occasionally in the past we would get, say, a really odd call every 2 weeks, maybe every 3 weeks. Now they're on a daily, multiple times a daily basis. So I think it's really just an amplification of the issues that we've seen in the past. And again, to reiterate the point, the thing that I've been most surprised about and happiest about is that stigma has long been our biggest challenge. How do we overcome this? How do we make our audience receptive? I think we've gotten a huge boost in that. So there's greater openness to the solutions that were already in play. And if anything, I think we need to speed up the work that we've been doing because we didn't anticipate this demand.
Yeah, maybe that silver lining. John.
Rick, actually, I'm going to defer. There are several questions that came up as a result of Rhonda's comments, but I think I want to hear Jack's perspective and then ask both of them the things that I'm thinking about right now.
Great. That's great. All right. Thank you. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Jack Rozelle. He's the medical director of Resolve Crisis Services of UPMC Western Psychiatric Hospital, psychiatrist with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center System-Wide Threat Assessment and Response Team, and the past president of the American Association for Emergency Psychiatry. So Jack, please, welcome back.
All right, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here with you. I cut my teeth way back in the 1980s, and through the EMT training was, one of those high school nerds hanging out and the ED just eating this stuff up, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Could not get enough of it. And when I was in college, I found my way into crisis hotline work and have really been, no more than arm's length away from this stuff for, at this point, most of my life. And I get it and I love it. And it's a delight to be here around this really important topic. For full transparency, I don't have any commercial disclosures. 20% of my time is actually paid for by FEMA, but it has nothing to do with this type of stuff. It's counterterrorism, oddly enough. All right. A really important thing to think about when we think about trauma and first responders and emergency work in general is that we want to be trauma-centered and trauma-focused in everything we do, in leadership and training, and how we approach our colleagues and our peers and our mentees. It's a universal precaution. We always assume it's there. And in fact, if I hit a nerve in the next few slides and you got to tap out, if nothing else, this is some really wonderful information from the Code Green campaign, which focuses on mental health and crisis emergency mental health support for first responders. And I want you to take that info with you, and there'll be some more information later on. Good crisis work, kind of like firefighting, kind of like first response, and a lot of emergency medicine and emergency stuff, it's as much about preparation as it is about putting out the fires. And I learned this years ago when I was actually at a picnic with a coworker who I worked with in a hospital, and we were complaining about, we're always putting out fires. We need helmets like the firefighters get. And on my shoulder, the steady hand of this wonderful old salt of the earth firefighter who'd been doing it for decades says, "Son, let me tell you why you're wrong." He says, most of our time is wearing the watch caps. It's the planning, it's the preparation, it's learning the routes, it's knowing how to enter the building, you know, where to put our hoses, where to put our ladders, where to put our teams. Because when we're in the fire, we don't have a lot of time to do reflective thinking. It's survival, it's putting out the fire. And I think it's a great metaphor for so much in crisis work and so much about how we deal with self-care is that we've got to find ways to be strategic, but we also have to recognize that when you're in the house and you're in the structural fire and it's burning down all around you, that's not necessarily the right time for me as a psychiatrist to step in with my 50-minute therapy hour skills. We got to do something a little bit different and think about it a little bit differently, right? So Rhonda mentioned some of the great stuff that's come out in gyms. This actually came out October of 2019, right? So before COVID hit. And most EMS professionals are saying they're feeling burnt out. And what is it, right? It's COVID isn't on the list because we didn't have COVID yet. It's wages, it's workloads, it's, you know, it's your biggest victories are protected by HIPAA and the bad outcomes are in the evening news. It's being a target of violence. It's all this stuff. And by the way, I found a couple great articles by Boudreaux from 25 years ago talking about EMS stress and burnout, and the list was almost the same. And I bet if we went 25 years before that, we'd find more of the same. Now we've added, I think, a lot of good resources and supports for first responders and health professionals over the past year. And by the way, this sense of being needed, of being in a critical and invaluable role, it's more true than ever. But I wager, unfortunately, that it's probably not enough to ameliorate the issues that we already had, let alone the issues that we've added over the past year. All right. So, you know, we've got to be strategic and we've also got to be tactical, right? There's a time and a place for different interventions. There's a reason why, you know, y'all out in the rigs are giving out the Narcan before you're calling me and saying, how do we get this person into a rehab, right? There's a time and a place for everything. And we've got to use our wisdom to make sure that we're addressing the strategy and some of these slow skills like resilience, as well as doing the tactics, those quick in the moment, what helps us stay well and stay on mission, right? You know, and COVID is unique. We haven't had anything like this before. It's recurring, it's pervasive, it's evolving. And the paradox is that our best tools for dealing with workplace stress and the types of issues that we're all living with right now are preventive. And we do have some tools for sort of, you know, in the heat of the moment, right? As I'm sitting here, this lanyard around my neck says CISM ASAP staff support. And I'm part of over 100 staff at UPMC who've been trained in CISM to provide that peer-to-peer response. And that's great for sort of that quick in the moment, you know, demobilization or how do you stay on mission. But this has been unlike any crisis we've ever faced before. You know, we've all seen this sort of classic model of what happens to communities and individuals and teams psychologically during disasters, right? And it's a sort of nice punctuated event. You know, it's the house fire, it's the mass shooting, it's the really bad event. And there's this phase when we all come together and then we sort of struggle and then hopefully we start to rebuild. But depending on where you are, this is a continuous and evolving type of event. And most of our tools for dealing with acute stress, most of our tools for dealing with these types of psychological impacts are designed for punctuated events. And we're going to have to evolve our interventions here. Right? And even the best tools have a limit. You know, as healthcare professionals, I think we compartmentalize a lot. You know, we're really good at saying, okay, we've got this really stressful shift, and then we do what we need to do to decompress on the way home, whether it's sitting on the subway, driving home, right? March 2021, folks are pretty damn full. You know, their compartments are pretty much chock full. The fatigue is real. Exhaustion and endurance are the themes that we're dealing with today and that we're going to be dealing with for the foreseeable future. You know, this slide deck that I'm building off of that I've, you know, recut and re-edited and modified more times than I can count over, you know, the past 10 years. It started off talking about sort of what crisis does to our brain, how we go to that quick response muscle memory and how sometimes that works for us, sometimes it doesn't. Then we started talking about, wellness and resilience type of issues, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. For the past couple months, it's been about endurance, right? It's about how do we stay afloat and stay well enough to keep ourselves intact, knowing that for a lot of us, we've got to go back into a shift and we don't know what's coming. But we know what we hope for, but we're not going to say that Q word, right? And so, wellness and resilience, it's about like laying down the right foundation before the hurricane hits. But right now, a lot of us, we're lashing ourselves to the trees and hoping for the best. And we got to realize that wellness isn't safety. Wellness might help. It's close to safety, but it's just not the same thing, right? We want to improve our ability to resist adverse events, our ability to cope in real time. But we got to be safe in what we're doing, right? Now, I love therapy dogs, don't get me wrong. But if they could like bring some N95s under the neck, like that barrel of hooch that the St. Bernards used to bring. And not that we're endorsing the use of alcohol or, elbow rounds, 12-ounce bicep curls as a coping strategy. But that, at the end of the day, I've been known to have a wee nip of the whiskey, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? That's a great line from Tyson. And what we know is that disasters and crises like this, they exploit the fault lines that are already there in ourselves as individuals and our teams and our programs and our departments, right? They exaggerate those small conflicts. They come out to play even more, right? And like I said, all of our tools are designed about helping people after a punctuated event. They're not intended for whatever this prolonged thing is that we're going through right now. And we've already heard, like, it's morally traumatic, right? The decisions and the things we've been exposed to are new and awful. And yeah, coping crisis support helps with that. It's extended. We're thinking about staff preservation. Like, how do I rotate people off in a way where they can get some downtime, even if they can't go travel for a vacation? It's hitting different areas at different times in different ways. It's prolonged, it's intermittent. It may not be the right time to start, meditation, yoga, mindfulness practices, even though they can help. But boy, we got to find a time sometime, right? But again, when you're in the middle of the structural fire, it's not the right time to have the conversation about how do you feel about fires. And oh yeah, it's politicized, right? We have government and policy leaders telling us that we're liars and fakers and whiners. And that hurts. That really hurts, right? So some of what we've learned here, right? Diverse teams need diverse tools, right? If I've got 5 people on my team, I might have to make 5 different types of tools available to help them out, because each one is going to be peculiar and picky about what's going to help and what isn't. I want to repeat. I want to nudge. I may even want to make things automatically available. Like, how do I get that counselor and just say, hey, you know what? You all get 30 minutes. You don't even have to walk through the door, but it's there for you if you need it. It's already scheduled. And whether you use it or not, it's there, right? We know that a lot of this is about trust in our chain of command, trusting the people above us to take care of us, and knowing that the boss has shown up with a tea cart, once a week, might feel a little bit insincere. Relationships matter, and what we can do to nurture each other and to find that buddy system approach, and to know that our work is wonderful. Our work has always had a cost. And one of our most important goals as leaders now is to make sure that our colleagues and our teams who are right at that sharp edge are not getting ground down. All right, this is my contact information. They have posted the slides, although I had to update that last image to be timely. That's my contact info. That's my Twitter handle. Do not hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you or anyone on your team. So, thank you.
Jack, thanks for the insights. And for the group, we had Jack on, I think, the emergency department rounds, and it was a very first where it was pretty clear to me from listening to all you as participants that panelists and speakers that, we really need to sort this out ourselves. And I got to a point where we probably need a little bit of help sorting this out. And Jack, you were like wonderful the last time and wonderful this time. So I'm really grateful for your contribution. I'm going to turn it over to John Kramer, for his comment or question, whatever he had left before we switch over to Jack. And then I'm going to do the polling, and then we're going to do around the Hollywood Squares. So, John.
Thank you both immensely. I mean, we have, we're fortunate in the Office of EMS in that we have a staff member who particularly has a particular passion about behavioral health issues and clinician wellness, and she continues to beat that drum. But you both have really provided personally very valuable comments and ideas. Jack, your comment about this being morally traumatic put this in a way that I had never thought of, and candidly really slapped me in the face on that one, because that is very important. I guess both of you have touched on one of the issues that continues to bother me, and it's been raised several times in the chat as well. And that has to do with lack of recognition and lack of support by superiors, by our bosses. And I'd be interested in both of your reflections on, I don't even want to suppose or presuppose that things are better now than they were 18 or 24 months ago in terms of support by leadership. But I'd be interested in both of your perspectives on that and what we need to do to improve that.
Absolutely agree. If we want to affect this change and make it sustainable in our cultures and in our organizations, we have to work with the front line, the people who are on the day-to-day front line, but we also have to work with the leadership, recognizing that a lot of our leaders came up through the toxic culture that we created. And now a lot of them understandably have this idea that I paid my dues, you need to pay your dues too. I sucked it up. And what we find in the times that we've reached out to talk about stress injury with leaders, we see light bulbs go on. And very seasoned, very good leaders will say, I suddenly see my career through a different lens now. And I understand these things that our culture took and adopted as signs of swagger or badges of honor are actually signs of stress injury. And it's not a marker that I'm succeeding. It's a marker that I could be doing a whole lot better. And I don't want my people to suffer this way. And that's, I think we can't affect any positive change unless we get that realization in our leaders.
Yeah, you know, it's, as I've worked with leadership teams around these types of issues, and by the way, as a leader, these are issues I work really hard on. You know, it's, you know, the old statement of, you got to tend the garden, you can't just let it go. And I've got to remind myself, like, how am I doing for my frontline staff? Again, avoiding the well washing. A lot of it begins with listening. A lot of it begins with consistently setting the tone of what's tolerable and what isn't tolerable in our workplace culture, right? One of my colleagues has said a number of times, and it really resonates, that our culture is only going to be as good as the worst thing that we tolerate. And, you know, we've got to find the right effective ways to call people in and bring them into that conversation and say, hey, let me tell you what you said. Where did that come from? What do we do about that? Recognizing that, you know, one of the things we have in child psychiatry, like, you know, kids do the best they can, parents do the best they can, leaders do the best they can, frontline staff do the best they can. But at the same time, we got to sort of, you know, say, hey, you know, you stumbled, this is where we're headed, and this is why we got to go in that direction. How do I help you get there?
Thank you. Rick.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, John and Rhonda. Let's go to the polling questions. Trying to get a few more insights here. Today, which of the following is the greatest challenge for your EMS organization staff? Yeah, thank you for like focusing on this instead of the email. People are really like jumping on quickly. Jack, I'm not actually, and Rhonda, let me just ask you, Jack, are you able to see these results as they're populating?
Yeah, yes, again.
Yeah, I thought the panelists did. I just wasn't sure whether or not you did or not. Yeah, okay. All right, like 5 more seconds. And let's stop there. So the piece that's really tricky with this, with these responses, and everybody's seeing them right now. I mean, I'm not gonna like go through them. You're seeing them right along with me. And Jack, I'm gonna put, and Ron, I'm gonna put up the next polling question just a second, not yet. Samantha, hang on. But I'm totally intrigued by, and Jack, you pointed this out on the last time you did rounds, this sort of like relentlessness of this. Okay, so you got the fatigue piece, but when it's that slippery slope transition from fatigue into I'm not mentally well and actually I need some help. And so that to me, particularly around this phase where it has this feel by many I've talked to, including feel for myself, of this no man's land with the pandemic right now. It's like, where exactly are we and where we're going? And, you know, there's this hope thing going on, but yeah, you saw what happened in England and so forth. And so this is a really tricky thing that I'm particularly intrigued with. Go ahead and put up next poll. I believe the culture regarding EMS clinician mental wellness and mental health is most similar to, and there are a number of options here.
Rick, if I can jump in to comment on the prior question.
Yeah,
regarding
yeah.
Fatigue and complacency. I really like the stress injury model, which we adopted from the military, you know, where there's a lot of parallels in our populations.
Yeah.
And what it talks about, and I saw Kate Elkins had made a comment earlier, when you're operating on the edge, you don't have a lot of bandwidth. And that's what we find when people are operating in a highly stress injured state, they lack the capacity for complexity. And I think that's the fatigue. I also think it's the complacency. They just can't. Their bandwidth, their capacity has been exceeded. And again, to Jack's point earlier, that takes a triage-like approach. We have to get to the people who are in the red zone to pull them back to a zone where they have that expanded room for complexity. But it also, the biggest bang for our buck is teaching people when they're in the green zone and in the yellow zone, how to self-regulate, to keep themselves happy or pull them back to the healthy place.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
All right, 5 more seconds. Yeah, 5 more seconds. All right, let's stop there. 59% of you voted. And it certainly looks like alignment here around this topic with public safety, law enforcement and firefighters than healthcare professionals.
And, you know, there's a lot that feeds into that. Part of it is there's this cultural tendency. It's, you know, us versus them. You know, we're the people who go in, and when everyone else is falling apart and they call 911 because it's an emergency, we're the ones who come in and fix it, right? And so there's this sort of separation of us from them. The work is tremendously stressful. There's that machismo, you know, we're going to be the tough people. We're not going to be people who have needs of it. And by the way, there's also real concern sometimes about what's the stigma, what's the professional impact. If people know that I'm getting treated for my PTSD, for my depression, and when things get really bad, when people get to the point of having those suicidal thoughts, there's also the intimate familiarity with what works and what doesn't. That is expressly lethal, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. Next. Since the pandemic, which is the most frequent change you've seen in clinicians just prior to their requiring professional mental health support? You know, the fatigue piece, and Jackie, we're talking about that sort of compartmentalization too. And I reflected quite a bit about how with this one, okay, the relentlessness doesn't go away, but you know, before the pandemic, you could go home from a shift and it disappeared. You can't go home from a shift and it disappeared. you get assaulted by the news, not to mention the whole PPE thing and your own family and so forth. So it's a 24-hour, not a shift by shift disaster you're responding to.
It's, it's a pandemic, it's a syndemic, it's layer upon layer of crisis and disaster. It's social determinants of health being revealed and, their terribleness. It is fatigue, it's workplace issues, it's financial issues, it's access to services. We've seen surges in gun violence and opioid overdoses. It's just, pick any one of those and it was enough. And when you put, 5 or 10 of them together, then of course people are struggling.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and see these results. 60% have voted. Really appreciate the participation. Decreased interaction with colleagues leads pack here by a lot. I'll let people take a look at this for a few more seconds. All right, next. The next few are pretty simple, straightforward ones, not as many responses, I think. Oh, yeah, today, and this is about EMS clinicians. I asked a similar question on one of the other set of rounds, but this is about EMS clinicians specifically.
I can tell you physicians are terrible at this. We are abysmal at that.
Yeah, we are terrible.
And wouldn't it be so wonderful if our training, our credentials, the letters behind our name gave us, just even a little bit of protection against, all the stuff that everyone deals with, let alone the trauma and the stress of the work. So.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this before in rounds, but I had a clinician that I learned was an alcoholic, and basically took him out of shifts like within 2 hours of a shift for about 60 months. And the best thing I did was talk about it as an entire department. And when he came back, talk about it with him and the entire department. And I'm trying to reflect, like today, if I was in the station or like I was having my, all hands meeting, would I be doing the same thing? I hope I would be. I mean, that's my personal experience, but then you get into the privacy thing and you get into all that, and oh my gosh, Jack and Miranda, we need you. That's all I can tell you. All right, let's take a look at these. 60% voted, and 46% indicated disagree, and 21% indicated strongly disagree.
And it was interesting, Rick, because I watched the numbers pile up as folks started voting, and the first response was disagree, and that continued to be the highest and the most rapid response that we got.
Really? Okay, I didn't catch that. I was talking. No, I'm glad you caught that. Yeah. When I did this before, I don't remember as many strongly disagree either. Wow. Yeah.
Well, and I think one thing is we all tend to identify with our role, whether it's medic, EMT, RN, firefighter. And when we get to the point where we recognize we're struggling, our life isn't the quality that we'd like it to be, we're fearful that we're going to lose that identity, that I'm not a good of whatever I most identify in. And that's just a death knell for us. When you lose that sense of identity, you lose your meaning and your purpose. And that's just a downward spiral. I don't think any of us are willing to, or haven't been in the past, openly embrace.
Yeah. That's really, you hit the nail on the head with that. Yeah, I totally.
We worry about, line of duty suicide and first responders. Retirement, early retirement is also a real high risk window.
Is that right? Or wait a minute, you said early retirement?
Yeah, and part of it is it's that adrenaline drop, right?
Right. And the loss of identity thing. Yeah.
But it's also, it's just what Rhonda was talking about. It's that sense of identity. It's that sense of, role and mission and purpose. And it's a hard transition. it can be a very hard transition for some. So
Yeah. The next polling question. Today, I feel I'm able to identify EMS clinician colleagues who need professional mental health support. I mean, Rhonda, you alluded to it, the sort of, it's the awareness that's much higher. Now, and then I think about Jack's slide where it's like all these things have been there for like, 10 years, 20 years since the beginning of time. And if we could tackle each one of those head on, maybe we'd be in a better place, but we ain't got time to do that because we're trying to do the pandemic. And so it's that compounding thing.
yeah.
Another 5 seconds. And then what we'll do is we'll go around the Hollywood squares for comment or questions by the panelists. And then Jack and Rhonda, you get the last word. Okay.
I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned that if we were confident that reaching out for help would truly be beneficial for us, mental health support, like it is getting your leg or your broken leg set,
Yeah.
then people would be lining up. There's that lack of confidence. And so many people have heard the negative stories that this is a fail point, this is a fail point. And that's one of the reasons that we have shifted with All Clear and Responder Strong to really improving the systems that are out there, to increase the accessibility, to increase the competency, and to Jack's point earlier, to provide multiple individual pathways, because not everybody reaches out for resources the same way. Not everybody needs the same sort of resources, and really building that better system. And I think, I looked at becoming a clinician. I did the first year in a program. And while I so value what a good clinician can do one-on-one, I really want to work on the systems. And I think our system has some strong components. It hasn't been really well organized. It's challenging to navigate. There's tons of barriers to access. And that's really what we're focusing on. And the demand outpaced our progress on that, which I'm actually really happy about.
Yeah, understand. Let's see, these 62% voted. This is kind of like a bell curve.
So here's an observation I'll make. I think working in EMS as a paramedic, when you see people around mental health issues, it's because we're calling for the involuntary commitment. It's because they're acutely manic or psychotic, they're agitated,
Interesting.
their PTSD is out of control, they're overdosing, what have you.
And Jack, they're crazy. That's the thing. They're crazy. When EMS responds, they're crazy.
Right. That is the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg, right? When we look at the numbers for how many people live with mental illness or substance use, you'll hear numbers like, oh, maybe it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 4. Well, there's actually good data that says it's 1 in 2 or 4 out of 5 or even 5 out of 6. It's not them and us, it's us together. And when we think about how do we work with people who are having mental health crises, mental health emergencies, we're just dealing with stress, it's not that patient we're getting out in the field, it's not so-and-so on the other shift, it's us together.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Let's see these results. Okay, you got them up. Great. Yeah, the bell curve. Next, yeah, we've had this up for a second. Okay, let's do the next one. I think this might be the last one. Number 6. Yeah, this is the last one. After WHO declares the pandemic is over, and I don't know who's going to put the stake in the ground about when the pandemic's over, but I threw in who WHO, just like as an organization I figured people would relate to, declares the pandemic is over. I feel confident that without external support, our EMS organization will be able to support the mental wellness and health needs of our clinicians. Yeah, I don't know who it was that said dispatcher, if it was Ron or Jack, doesn't matter. But I'm just kind of like picking up on what Jack just said about like we're in this together. It truly is. It's like the dispatchers. It's like, yeah, the frontline EMT, the paramedic, the supervisors, the training coordinators, the white shirt people, all those people. I mean, it's like all of them. And that one, John, it may have evolved in EMS and I've missed it, but I don't see or hear a lot of that all in this together around the mental health piece in EMS. And I might be wrong, but Not seeing that. All right, let's stop there. And certainly balanced toward the disagree, strongly disagree. Let's see, 49, yeah. 68% indicating disagree or strongly disagree. And Rhonda, like you have pointed out, you're trying to do this as fast as you can with what you got, but is it going to be able to handle it? And both of you have alluded to, and I would totally concur that, you know, once we've declared victory, it ain't victory yet for the mental health and wellness challenges. So with that, let me go around to around the block here. And I'm going to go to Dave Gerstner first, and then Bill Fales. Dave, anything for the good of the group?
You know, we have dealt with this for years and dealt with it very, very badly. We see people who are hurting and we respond in a joking manner and make it worse. My guess is that everyone on here knows someone who has left by suicide or at least tried. We've had this multiple times in my area. It impacts EMS, fire, law enforcement, dispatchers, all of us. And I applaud all the efforts. I have to say, I don't think we're there yet. I haven't seen the system that makes it, and I think Harry's comment about the broken leg is just absolutely right there. If we had that confidence, and I know very few people who have that confidence that the system would help. I wish it were there. And I hope we get there. Thanks, Rick.
Me too, Dave. Yeah. Bill Fales, if you got any comment, question?
Yeah, just a quick comment and more of an observation. Over the last probably just several weeks, I've had a chance to talk to a number of EMS clinicians that have really been involved with either working in vaccination clinics or monoclonal antibody therapy. And one of the things that's really striking is almost every one of them made some kind of a comment about how the positive that experience was, and how that was it was like the best mental health therapy they could have ever imagined, because they were actually doing something that was preemptive and proactive and something that they just don't usually get to do. So I guess the question is, can we think of ways to actually try to build that into our culture where, we're going to be getting COVID shots and certainly flu shots for forever. And can we build that in so that we get our people re-engaged on the prevention side, maybe?
Hey, Bill, real quickly, I've picked that up on that too. Not just, I mean, Doug Kubas was the first I heard it from, but then I've heard others say the same thing. I mean, I've caught that. Carol, I think there's some of that from you as well. And I think about EMTs, paramedics, and actually clinicians who do shift after shift, and they get tired of the horror. And then there's two paths. One is this path of the clinician goes into like shutdown. They show up for shifts and they do their work, and they totally like divorce from anything related to health. And then there's this other path where they will end up in prevention activities in a substantive way. And that turns that whole like psyche around. And I've seen it with clinicians around, injury prevention, those kinds of things. But you're right on. I mean, I've heard this now, like people with great big smiles on their face that didn't have them for a long time with the vaccination. So I think you're onto something there for sure. Rob McClintock?
Rick, real quickly, and the other point to that is that the people they're seeing, the patients that they're seeing, are appreciative and thanking them.
Yeah, that's kind of a rarity. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So Rob, please.
Yeah, thank you for these presentations. They were awesome. just identifying the need is really important. We as the IFF has made great strides within our organization for our memberships in this arena, but we still have a very long way to go. I do have a quick question for either one of you presenters or anyone on here that can answer this. Are there any strategic ways to identify early on, just through monitoring, sick leave? Are there any red flags? We talked, and Dr. Hunt hit it really, really hard on the head there, saying where fatigue and, mental health are very close to one another. I think it's a very fine line that he brought up. And, when people are calling out maybe excessively, maybe arriving work late, or maybe trying to switch shifts very often or frequently, or, are there any ways, strategic ways that, can help identify things earlier in this process, whether it be from the supervisor or manager's viewpoint or even coworkers?
Absolutely, Rob. I think that all of the things that you identified are potential indicators for issues. All of the things you identified are also things that agencies have typically addressed in a disciplinary fashion in the past, looking for punitive action, which isn't always helpful. And I don't think that sometimes punitive isn't deserved, but I think many times those are the indications. Something's wrong at home, there's depression, there's substance misuse. And if we can approach it through that angle, we can help our individual, we can keep retention, we can normalize, because everybody else sees, oh, we didn't go after that guy because he used all his sick leave. We didn't fire him because he got a DUI. We engaged him in conversation and asked how we can help, because we recognize that this job contributed to that. It's not personal shame, it's not weakness. This is occasionally or oftentimes a consequence of the job. And when we address that, that's probably one of our most powerful tools for normalization. But you also need to have somebody in the organization who is designated to do that. I think there's so much going on that if we just leave it to a team effort, it's going to go missing. A wellness officer is a great opportunity for that role.
Yeah, it's not, I'm reflecting back to the safety officer for the helicopter, the nurse safety officer, the one designated. I'm not trying to make up policy. It's just I don't think a training coordinator can focus totally on something that needs this much attention, and it needs a lot of attention. Anyway, yeah. Alex, and then Carol.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. First, I want to thank Jack and Rhonda for coming, onto this program and sharing their knowledge and their expertise. I agree with Dan. Our community and other communities, have a lot of work to do. I think it's so important to normalize this conversation, in our community, so that people can get access to the resources that they need. I keep coming back to this in my mind. Leave no man or woman behind, right? If you had an aviator shot down behind enemy lines, you wouldn't sit around the table and say what a crappy pilot they were. Right, you would mobilize the team necessary to go and bring them back. And to me, it's no different than somebody that's in the abyss of depression and at risk for suicide. We need to put the team together and bring them back. The more we can do to normalize this conversation and get people the resources that they need, the better we'll be off for it. Thanks, Rick, for giving me a couple of minutes on that point.
Alex, you and others got to help me normalize it. I mean, these rounds can't do it alone. That's for sure. They just can't. I mean, we can have a conversation.
Yeah, I think we all need to, right? Everybody.
Yeah, right. No, it's a call. Yeah,
how to do it. Yeah.
The call to arms.
Yeah. But just to echo that, if you saw one of your staff or colleagues clutching their chest, choking, facial droop, you wouldn't hesitate at all. So if they're showing evidence of PTSD, if they're showing evidence of depression, if they're talking about being hopeless or suicidal, why would you hesitate?
Yeah. Great point, Jack. Great point. Carol.
These were fantastic presentations and definitely much needed. We talk, one of the things about this pandemic, I look back at when it started, we never expected it to last this long. And everybody is looking for a light in the tunnel that still isn't clear. You know, we talk about what's it going to be like when it's over. The bottom line is when it's over, we're still going to be having stressful situations, you know, dealing with responding to kids with SIDS and everything else, heart attacks, strokes. Everybody's going to need like 2 months off, and we're not going to get it. So I think building these resources are huge. I hope that once we develop those resources, we take that additional step. The one thing I think that is ignored on all levels, or is less highlighted in all levels in American medicine, is the need for preventative medicine. You know, when we have our healthcare providers and you know, they get their hepatitis immunizations, we check titers every year. I think, you know, we also need to have that mental health piece so that the provider is not only assessed, but has an internal check. Like, I'm going to the bar, you know, 2 extra days a week. You know, that's like the earlier sign rather than waiting till they're a full-blown alcoholic and, you know, trying to chase that. And then going back to what Rhonda said, you know, it's really important too not to lose your persona. What we do in EMS is a profession, but it's not us as a person. So that EMS circle is very valuable because we see things that people aren't supposed to see. You can't go home and talk to your family. But we also need to lose that piece, or not lose that piece of where are you as a person, and make sure that you also have a circle of support that know you as you. You know, for me, at the hospital, yeah, I'm Dr. Cunningham, this, that, and the other. But, you know, when I step out of there, I'm hanging out with some of the people I went to kindergarten with who know it. And sometimes they're the ones that are tapping me on the shoulder like, girlfriend, you need to sit down and get some sleep. So, you know, at the end of the day, in the beginning of every day, you know, I'm Carol, the blue collar kid from Maple Heights, Ohio. There's no letters after my name. So, and part of that is making sure you don't give up all those hobbies and things that you enjoyed because our jobs are so demanding. So this is great. You know, there's a lot of work to be done, but I also think we need to look at changing our whole culture, taking the Superman cape off, which is the way we should be spending most of our lives, and incorporating this into part of our preventative medicine initiatives for our career as an element of creating resiliency. Thank you.
Hey, Carol, I seized on your 2 months of vacation. So here's the thing. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but this recovery, okay, so recovery to some normal, quote unquote, whatever that new normal is. And what this rush to the recovery, which is absolutely everybody wants to go away, but are people actually going to take time to recover? And the people recovery, I haven't seen as part of that conversation so much. So thank you for bringing up the two. I'm going to recommend to my supervisor a week off a month for all federal staff and see how far that gets us with the general public. Anyway, taxpayer dollars at work. So Dr. Kramer, the last panelist, co-moderator before we go to Rhonda and Jack, and I see Dan, you might have to jump out of your chair before we close here. John.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate the comments by our two presenters and the impact that they obviously have had on the audience today. I'm going to address one of the comments that was made earlier related to dispatch folks and 911 telecommunicators. They are part of our population. They are a critical part of our population. We're fortunate in the Office of EMS that we have the National 911 Program Office, and we have two folks that never let us forget the role that telecommunicators play. So I want to thank them, and we'll continue to address that issue. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Rhonda, let me go to Jack first. Yeah, Jack, please. Anything for the good of the group before we end?
So I'll begin with Ditto, because these have all been really, really good points. And I'll go back to something I said earlier. You know, think of trauma-informed care, trauma-centered work in our leadership and our teaching and how we approach our colleagues and ourselves. Know that compassion and patience are wonderful universal interventions, but know that there's really good resources and really good supports and help that's out there. And don't hesitate to reach out, and don't hesitate to fight and fight hard to make sure that you and those you care about are getting not just good clinical care, but care from people who get the issues, who get the cultural issues that are at play. It's absolutely worth it and can absolutely make a difference.
Thanks, Jack. I want to point out that there's a big, long bridge between clinicians and to a psychiatrist's office. A big, 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 long bridge, and sometimes it never gets crossed. But I can't think of anybody better than you two have helped us cross that. So I'm deeply grateful, and I mean that. So Rhonda, please.
I really appreciative of having had this opportunity to connect. I've been thinking throughout this whole session about the quote from Margaret Mead about never doubt the ability of a small group of dedicated individuals to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I'm really struck by the participants, the panelists, and what I've been watching in the chat column, because I think that this is a collaborative mission, and that I'm really heartened to see how much passion there is behind this. To Carol's point about recovery, I had a quick anecdote. One of our medics who worked 2 months straight in the surge in New York City, he reconnected with me recently. Turns out he left EMS afterward, and he decided to become a welder. He said, I just couldn't do it anymore. But as he recovered and as he healed on his own, he began to realize that EMS is his vocation, it's his passion, and he wanted to come back into it. So he started back up with IFT, and he reached out and he said, I want to be a medic again. I want to do ALS, but I don't ever want to hurt the way I did. How do I prevent it? And I think that's one of the other silver linings to come out of this is people recognize, oh, this isn't the shameful thing I thought it was in the past. This is an injury. And just like I trained to prevent physical injuries, I can train to prevent the mental and emotional. And I'm really excited about that. I look forward to continuing to work with this group to help guide our efforts, and really appreciate this opportunity.
Well, thanks both of you. And Dr. Kramer and I are going to have to figure out together how to make sure we continue on this. I mean, we haven't shied away since the beginning, but in particular, when people get really tired of hearing anything pandemic related, these challenges aren't going to go away. And so how the trick is how to stay on it in a way that we're not just trying to band-aid what we had before, but transformationally try to move this along. And it's going to be hard. And I recognize that, but willing to hang in there if the participants and our panelists are along with us and our extraordinary speakers. So thanks to the participants. The chat, I mean, I am overwhelmed with how people's candor in the chat. It broke 50,000 HIPAA violations. And I'm just I've done that lecture. And I really do deeply appreciate people being that candid. That's quite a lot for anybody to do. So thank you. And to our panelists, really appreciate you showing up. You always, it's just wonderful, what you bring to the each of the rounds. And then to Echo, awesome. And thanks for the last minute polling questions. Appreciate that. Yes, they do last minute stuff. There is, let me tell you, I'd take them into the trauma room with me, promise you. And then John, hey, thanks for hanging in. Our speakers, Jack and Rhonda, couldn't ask for anything better. I mean, really, really couldn't have. Yeah, deeply, deeply grateful. With that, I'm working on planning the vacation so we all take one for rounds. No, I don't have the date yet, but Jack and Rhonda, just so you know, we actually, I think the first time we did, it was kind of fun. When I say fun, it was like Thanksgiving. We decided we would take off that week on behalf of people's mental health and wellness. And that got actually a lot of traction at HHS. So yeah, we're going to do that, but I don't know when yet. So with that, we'll see you on the next one. And thanks so much all. Bye.